On the 15th of August 2013, Iraq opened a bridge over the Tigris River to allow Syrians fleeing the civil war to seek refuge. Thousands began streaming across into Iraq's Kurdistan region, with more than 30,000 arriving in the ensuing month. UNHCR's External Relations Officer Ben Farrell was called upon for an emergency mission to the region to report on UNHCR's operations. I spoke with Ben when he returned to Australia. So Ben, you arrived on August 30 in Iraq. Can you describe the scene when you first arrived? What were the living conditions of the refugees?
I arrived about 2 weeks after the initial influx of around 30,000 refugees across the border from Syria. So UNHCR at that time was working really hard with its partners in the international community and local NGOs to try and provide the initial needs for those refugees. That's shelter. We pitched tents, often on patches of ground that were just bare dirt when we arrived. And by the time I left, it was a city of 12,000 refugees living there. So it was a massive task at that time to provide those services for the refugees coming across the border.
And what was the overall mood of the refugees that you came across?
Well, I think most refugees were, first of all, happy to be somewhere safe. The civil war in Syria, as you know, was and is a completely dangerous place to be. So coming across the border was a real opportunity for refugees, first of all, to find safety and security from persecution. So the mood in the camps and for the refugees who were living out in the city was one, I think, of hope, one, I think, of having the opportunity to restart their lives through the generosity of the Iraqi people and the people of the Kurdistan region. If the war goes on longer in Syria, we may see that situation change, but for now, I think the refugees did have a sense of hope and optimism.
Yeah. And what were the main priorities of UNHCR's work in Iraq in those initial weeks?
In the initial weeks, it really was responding to the emergency phase. So that is providing refugees with shelter in the form of, usually it was tents in the camps, food, healthcare, education for their kids, the basic necessities of life, water, somewhere to wash and somewhere to bathe. Those are the things that people need when they come across the border with just about nothing. Many people came with just the clothes on their backs. So that initial emergency response to scramble, I think, was an amazing effort by the international community and by the government in Iraq to assist those people coming across.
And I understand part of your role was to conduct field research into the needs of refugees living outside of the camps in the cities of northern Iraq. Can you tell me what you observed?
Yeah, well, it's not all that well known, but around 60% of the Syrian refugees who are in northern Iraq are actually living outside of camps in the community. So they're living often with relatives, or they're often renting apartments and often living in very difficult, crowded conditions. So UNHCR was trying to develop some programs to assist those refugees, because they can often be forgotten because they're not all in the one place, and it's very difficult sometimes to deliver those services.
So how has Iraq actually been affected by the surge in refugee numbers? Is there a general feeling of hospitality from the Kurds, or were there any tensions?
There is a great deal of hospitality from the people of Iraq and the people of the Kurdistan region specifically. They've opened their land to the people coming across from Syria. In many cases, they've opened their homes. A lot of the Syrian refugees are staying with relatives or staying with other members of the community. That said, 200,000 Syrian refugees are now in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, so that does place pressure on the community and on the services, on basic services that are available for the community. So what we're trying to do, UNHCR and its partners, is to invest in some of those services in the community for the benefit of both the refugee population and the local host population. So that means building new classrooms in schools. That means providing medical equipment in medical centres and refurbishing some of the medical centres so that the Syrian refugees and their families can access the services that they need, but also so that the host community gets an improvement. And we think that those sorts of programs can really help to limit any community tension that might start to show itself if that strain on the services increases over time, which it obviously will.
So half of all Syrian refugees are children. How did that affect UNHCR's operations?
Well, I mentioned education, and that's one of the main things for children, obviously. The kids from Syria needed to go to school in Arabic schools, of which there are very few in the north of Iraq. So one of UNHCR's big priorities, along with its partners like UNICEF and UNESCO, was to try and build some more classrooms, make more facilities available for those kids so that they could go to school and resume their studies and not have a 6-month, 12-month, 2-year hole in their education, which is very damaging to a child's development.
And I understand that you actually launched a back-to-school program as you were leaving.
We did, with our partners UNHCR and UNESCO. UNHCR launched a back-to-school program, which was to go out into the communities and tell refugee families that we were expanding the places available in schools, and that the government of Kurdistan did allow and was encouraging the kids to go to school. So we launched an information campaign to tell them that, and it was actually my last day in Kurdistan, where we had a big launch in the park with children choirs and puppet shows and things like that. And to see the kids, the smiles on the kids' faces when they received some small tokens from us and from UNICEF of backpacks and school equipment, and to know that they could go back to school, I think was one of the greatest things that I saw while I was there. One of the happiest times that made me.
So you must have spoken with a number of refugees whilst in Iraq. Is there a particular story that they shared with you that's really stuck with you?
One family in particular I met, they'd fled from Damascus into a regional part of Syria, but their son, who was about 6 years old, had cerebral palsy, so he needed some real specialist medical attention and physiotherapy as he grew, which wasn't available in that regional part of Syria to which they fled. So they ended up taking that decision to cross the border into northern Iraq, specifically so that they could get the healthcare that their little boy needed. Now I met them at UNHCR's registration centre in Sulaymaniyah, so they were registering as refugees with us, and then our protection staff could then refer them on to the specialist medical services for the little boy. So that was not only a really heartfelt story meeting this family, but also a real practical example for me of the protection role of UNHCR in being able to make sure that families who need specific services and special protections can find them.
So just summing up, what was the situation and main priorities of UNHCR when you left on November 14?
Well, look, one of the big priorities for UNHCR when I left was what we call winterisation, which is helping to get our camps and our services ready to help the refugees through the winter. The weekend before I left, it poured rain for 3 days straight. So we had just in time managed to roll out our winterisation programs, and that when I say winterisation, I mean extra kerosene for families so they can heat their tents in their homes. It means distributing extra blankets and warm clothes for children. It means putting concrete slabs beneath the tent so that the water doesn't seep up into the tents during rainy periods. So it also means extra drainage dug around the refugee camp. So that was a real priority, and the planning for that was taking place the whole time I was there, and it was great to see it start to be rolled out just as I was leaving, because I understand it gets quite cold and quite wet in northern Iraq during the winter. So I'm glad that program was being rolled out.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Ben.
Thank you very much.